That will be useful for people if you ever have any doubts about what we practice, the power of loving kindness, where it comes from, why we practice it, how do we practice it, what are the references for it. Loving kindness is definitely a valid and strong and well-established practice, and it goes quite a lot further than a lot of people think. Well, it's nice to have you all here, and so like I said earlier, tonight we'll have a little bit of material. So Naveen's been bombarded with some questions lately, and one of the questions we get the most is why we practice loving kindness meditation, and that comes from usually people with Vipassana background and mindfulness of breathing background. And so there's always a bit of curiosity around why we choose loving kindness and how it is practiced and what's the difference, and do we get to a Vipassana place at some point? And of course, I can't answer all of this tonight, but I shared the PDF. You'll see it's quite thick. It's a few pages of reference. I will not be able to explain all of it in great details tonight, but I will try to keep it concise and have a good overview of the whole document and the whole topic. And the document is meant for you to keep, and then later you can check back on it and inquire a little bit deeper. I wanted to have a lot of material so that people felt like they really it came from somewhere and we're not making that up. So there's a very thick sutta references here. And so we'll have this in three main stages tonight. We'll start with some foundational knowledge, kind of an orientation of where does it start from, where do we take all of this, and why do we practice it. And then we'll go into more meditation instructions, and then a bigger kind of overview of where that ties in with the Buddha's past lives and all that, if some people are interested in that. And it's interesting to hear some of the stories and reflections on that, and maybe some aspects about why it's so meritorious or why it's so good for us to practice this. And so I will be going forward tonight, and we'll be going directly to the meat of the matter. And so the talk is based on the previous two talks that I gave. The first one was the advice to Rahula, where the Buddha teaches his son meditation, and how Rahula was asking about anapanasati, or mindfulness of breathing instructions, and he explains to his son quite a different path before he gets there, before he gets the instructions, and loving kindness is part of that sequence. First, you should start with loving kindness. And then last talk was about the power and the goodness behind the loving kindness practice, even for the time that it takes to milk a cow. I don't know if you remember. It would be more beneficial to practice loving kindness just for that time, maybe 5 minutes? 4 minutes if you're a really good, skilled cow milker. And about that time. And it would be more meritorious to just develop that for 5 minutes than to, it was kind of like Elon Musk's kind of millionaire donation to whatever you want to give money to, which is amazing also, but this very big offering of a lot of gold and all this, it would be more meritorious to just practice loving kindness meditation for just 4 or 5 minutes. And so building upon this, well, now we have a pretty strong basis to start from, and we'll go into a little bit. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because on retreat, this is a classic talk that I give on day 2 of every retreat, the difference between the two mental states, the two kinds of mental states, wholesome and unwholesome, which is at the core of the Buddha's awakening. And for those of you all here, have all attended retreats and here also, this is at the core of the Buddha's understanding. And basically, so to just have an overview quickly, what did the Buddha understand? He understood the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path. I think we can all agree on this, but more specifically that really what is the source of our problems, of our trouble, is discontent, dissatisfaction, not being okay with how things are. So always wanting something else or not liking something, wanting or pushing. And that keeps us in a state that is agitated, that is not calm, that is not settled, and that causes trouble for us. So what we are attached to, what we hold on to, in the end, things change and it is bound to change. And that causes us problems, trouble, sorrow. And so we see that discontent actually bloom into two different mental states. One is wanting, and the other one is pushing away, or sometimes is described as greed and aversion, or just pulling or pushing, this wanting or liking or disliking. And there's quite a lot of material here in the intro, so I'm not going to go over all of that, but you can please go ahead and do that at home if you want a brief recap on right intention. So right intention, right effort, and right view, basically. That's what that is here. And so loving kindness is quite special, because if we want to understand the Buddha's awakening, what he was teaching, what he was practicing, then we need to understand what his awakening was, and that selfish desires and aversion always create problems for us, and the cure that he prescribed for aversion or dislike was loving kindness. And we'll explore a bit more about that throughout the talk, but there is a way that we practice this, and it's called right effort. We cultivate wholesome states and we abandon unwholesome, unskillful states, and when we do that continuously, we move towards awakening. Our minds and hearts become uplifted, free, liberated. And it's all in here in the foundations. First, we want to understand a little bit the nature of loving kindness, the inherent qualities. And so at the root of it, we want to make sure that we understand that unwholesome qualities are agitated and will distract our mind. They will make our mind unsettled. And the wholesome qualities will gladden our mind, uplift our mind, and make it clear, make it settled. And so here the Buddha in this sutta, which is called Nissaraniya Sutta, Anguttara Nikāya 5-200, he says, one reflects upon outward attraction or wanting, selfish wanting or sensory wanting. The latching mind does not rejoice. It is not clear. It is unsettled and unliberated. Then one reflects upon letting go. The mind that lets go rejoices. It is clear, established, and liberated. Moreover, that mind is happy, well-developed, elevated, emancipated, and completely unshackled from latching on. Then one becomes liberated from the obsessive and oppressive mental movements arisen from constant desires, and one does not experience those sensations any longer. This is said the breaking free of outward desires. And then we have the same for anger, basically. The anger is the same. When we feel it, it's not, our mind is not, the angry mind does not rejoice. Do you agree with that? Good, great. We got an intelligent crowd tonight. Does not rejoice, it is not clear, it is unsettled and unliberated. And then the opposite is the mind that is free from anger. And here we want to understand that the Buddha, actually, when he said non-anger, he meant loving kindness, compassion. That's where those states, the Brahmavihāras, sympathetic joy, and boundless calm. The mind freed from anger rejoices. It is clear, established, and liberated. Moreover, the mind is happy, well-developed, elevated, emancipated, and completely unshackled from anger. So this is one of the shorter discourses that I like to refer to understand. Really, there's a clear difference. And here, there's another one here that I also like to say. This is important because I hear it a lot nowadays that the anger and the quality of the mental state, whether it's jealousy or anger, it doesn't matter. It's about the awareness behind it, or there can be anger and loving kindness and all that, but actually that is what the Buddha would call delusion, because there is a clear difference between those two, and here it's elaborated a bit more. There's these 6 elements of escape, and that's one of them. One might say thus: I have developed and cultivated the liberation of the mind by loving kindness, made it my vehicle and basis, carried it out, consolidated it, and properly undertaken it, yet ill will still obsesses my mind. That person should be told, not so, do not speak thus, do not misrepresent the Blessed One, the Buddha. For it is not good to misrepresent the Blessed One. The Blessed One would certainly not speak in such a way. It is impossible, inconceivable, friend, that one might develop and cultivate the liberation of the mind by loving kindness, make it one's vehicle, and that ill will could still obsess one's mind. And so here, I really like to put a lot of emphasis on this, because this is there's a clear difference here. And when anger comes and it takes over the mind, mindfulness slips and anger comes over, takes over. And of course, there's a gradient. So sometimes, it doesn't have to, you don't lose complete awareness, but sometimes we do. We retaliate instantly. It's just, that impulse. It just goes right there. And so mindfulness slips, anger comes, and then we do something not so smart usually. And touching on the inherent qualities of loving kindness, I like to, this is not specifically mentioned in the suttas, but it is in some ways, but indirectly, is that loving kindness is a conduit of wisdom. Because when we start practicing loving kindness, when we have that loving kindness more and more in the heart, in our minds, when other unwholesome states arise, it creates a very clear contrast between the two. And so it's very easy to see when anger arises, for example, then it's very obvious. It becomes very clear. And so I like to say that it's a conduit for wisdom. And coming back to a little bit of the biology of loving kindness, I like to tie some newer kind of science and understanding around it. And as everybody knows, I'm a big fan of the polyvagal theory and the vagus nerve. And one of the researchers that I really appreciate his name is Dr. Dacher Keltner. And as he explained, I could explain it, but I like his words more. And it's also saying, I'm not just making that up here. He's actually has a a lab dedicated to the greater good and the research of human emotions. And so he says, when you feel compassion, the vagus nerve is activated because it slows your heart rate, it opens you up to other people, and it allows you to vocalize. It allows you to look at people in the eyes. When we meditate, the vagus nerve is activated, and then awe activates the vagus nerve because it orients you to be open and to the world and to other people. In other ways of understanding it, this is called the social engagement system. And it's basically when we feel safe, we are able, we don't feel threatened, we're not in a fight or flight survival mode, and therefore we can engage with others because we feel safe, we feel good. And that's what Dr. Stephen Porges also explains in his polyvagal theory. So when we are in a safe state, we can access higher cortical functions, but when we are in danger states, those systems turn off and we are defensive. And so see how also those unwholesome states and the wholesome states, also what it does in our biology. Like biologically, we are wired, as mammals, we are wired to tune into cues of safety and to open up when we feel safe and when we feel compassion, when we feel empathetic and loving. And so it's also in science, today's science, that is coming up, which is quite interesting. I quite like that part. And that loving kindness is aware by nature. So one of the places that we find that in the suttas, it's actually in the Mettā Sutta, which is a very famous discourse, that just as a mother would, for her child, look after her only child with her own life, in the same way towards all beings, one develops a boundless heart. I like to use that analogy of the mother that cares for her child because, or the father, or whatever, who has love for their child. Love means awareness, means caring attention, means being listening to the needs of somebody else, which is also leaving the realm of me, myself, to serve somebody else, which is also another aspect that I'll be talking about, how loving kindness is also selfless. True loving kindness is selfless in the end. And so here we go, making good progress. Everybody's following everywhere around the planet here? Okay. Thumbs up. Okay, and here, now we start, great. We start to have a little bit of a step further. Now we understand the inherent qualities and how the Buddha, this is just an example of how he taught this section on loving kindness, and a very common analogy that he used for us to understand how it relates to unwholesome states that could be present. He says, then, chief, this virtuous seeker, void of longing, void of impatience, uninfatuated, fully conscious and continually present, meditates with a heart filled with love, suffusing one direction, a second, a third, and a fourth, thus above, below, and everywhere across, to all living beings in this boundless universe. One meditates with a heart filled with boundless love, vast, expansive, measureless, free from anger and impatience. Chief, imagine a mighty conch blower. In India, this is quite famous. When I was in the Himalayas, they still have yogis that they do a bit like we do, but they will blow the conch in the evening at dusk. And when you hear it on the countryside in the neighborhood, that means that the next morning they will come and get food. and so they kind of let you know in advance. And I met one of them, and it was really interesting. And they were saying, "Oh, well, he's just like you." It's like, you guys are doing the same thing, but it's just a bit different. And so it's I guess it's more culturally. It's still a cultural thing in certain parts of India, and so that analogy is kind of really close to that culture, which I find very beautiful. And in any case, he says, imagine a mighty conch blower who could effortlessly let his sound be known to the four directions. In the same way, when the release of mind by boundless love is developed and cultivated, any previous selfish actions cannot remain, they cannot stay. And so this is a pretty powerful statement, and the Pali is yang pamana katang kammang, so like limited karma, any limited karma that was done. And if you're a little bit knowledgeable about the teachings, then you know that in certain other teachings the Buddha says greed is a maker of limit, aversion is a maker of limit, and jealousy is a maker of limit. And then when these states are not there, then it's limitless. And that's why he uses the liberation, the measureless liberation of the mind is associated with loving kindness and the Brahmavihāras. Because when we feel this in our heart, fully open in all directions, it's no limited karma no limited emotion, no limited selfish intentions can remain. It has to be completely clear. And this is an analogy and a teaching that comes many times in the suttas and in different Nikāyas. And when we see that, we can know that it was a pretty common teaching. And so it's in a few different collections, and it's found throughout the Nikāyas. To put this talk together, I pulled all the suttas on loving kindness in the past few weeks, and from the whole canon, and so it was really interesting to be diving back again in all of those. But it was interesting to see what also the trends were, and which one came back over and over again, which I might have missed before. And so that's an analogy of the Conch that I noticed was coming over a few times again. And then the next base that is good to know about loving kindness is that the Buddha is that idea of boundlessness, of measurelessness. And so to not keep things limited to ourselves and small, and to go beyond that and to develop a mind that was boundless. And there's a sutta here that is not about the Brahmavihāras at all, but the Buddha clearly states you should make your mind boundless, and to do that, let go of the hindrances and then make your mind boundless. And so I like to point that out because nowadays there's a big movement about concentration, which is like kind of doing the opposite, like really narrowing down the focus of awareness. Whereas the Buddha, actually, when you read the teachings, you see that it's all about having a boundless mind, a boundless heart, which is really interesting. Anyways, food for thought, you can look into it. I'm gonna start skipping over the heavier material because we need to get moving. And so here there's a bit of an analysis that like I said, I pulled out all the suttas on loving kindness, and it's not complete yet because I wanted to have a comparison with the breath meditation. But in the Digha Nikāya, all the four Brahmavihāras mentioned like in one after the other with the whole sequence of boundless development. It comes back 5 times in that collection. In the Majjhima Nikāya, it comes back 12 times. And the Samyutta Nikāya 4 times, and Anguttara Nikāya 14 times. And so, just so that we understand, this is quite a lot, where the Buddha repeatedly teaches that or refers to that as being part of the spiritual path. And so sometimes we tend to go towards anapanasati and mindfulness of breathing, but in the Majjhima Nikāya, the Brahmavihāras are talked about a lot more than mindfulness of breathing. It's just that it's different. And I'm not saying that mindfulness of breathing is not important. It is very important. It's a beautiful teaching. But it's really good to also know what else is there. And there are very key suttas that I will be talking about that have those 4 Brahmavihāras as an actual meditation practice in it. And so it is a very important part. We really overlook that practice nowadays. And it's kind of put to the side a little bit as a kind of a feel-good meditation, but it's actually quite profound. And so to give it a good, proper justice, I would try to kind of pull the numbers a little bit. And now we're moving into the meditation aspect. Phew! And one of the things that I really thought was interesting when I found it was in one of the suttas that is on the 11 benefits, the Mettā Sutta, the 11 benefits of loving kindness. And of course there's 11 of them, as I'm not going to read through them. You can read them at home. They're beautiful, but one of them is really interesting, and I think I really like to bring it up over and over again. And it says, when the liberation of the mind through boundless love is practiced, developed, cultivated, used as a vehicle, made as a foundation, consolidated, accumulated, and thoroughly undertaken, 11 benefits are to be expected. And then the 8th one is one's mind quickly enters Samādhi or becomes collected. Tuvattang cittang samadhiyati. And the Buddha did not say that for other methods of meditation. He said that only for loving kindness. I haven't found anywhere else in the suttas where he says that for something else, which is quite interesting. Anyways, I'll leave you with that. And then other really interesting suttas or references before we get deeper into the topic of meditation is the finger snap series, and where the Buddha says, even for the time of a finger snap, if a monk or anyone practices with a mind of loving kindness or love, boundless love, I say that he is one who lives practicing Jhāna, one who practices the teacher's teaching, one who applies his instruction, and one eats the country's alms undiluted. What to say then of one who would cultivate it? And then the next one is, even if for the time of a finger snap a monk develops, or even for the time of a finger snap a monk attends to anything with a mind of loving kindness, he says the same thing over again. Now I translate here, I say that he is one who lives practicing Jhāna. Sometimes people say it's actually not that, he is not devoid of Jhāna. Well, it's very similar. And then there's another sequence right after that where the Buddha says the same thing, but for jhanas. So if you're thinking that they're practicing jhana, but they're not devoid of jhana, and it's not that because they're practicing jhana, they're not practicing jhana, well, I mean, I'm not going to get into a Pali debate here, but that doesn't hold. Some practical aspects now. As I mentioned, true love or true loving kindness is selfless. And the more we deepen into wisdom, into vipassana, if you want to call it like that, into anatta, into the realizations and insights about non-self or impersonality or impermanence and all of the three marks of existence. The more we deepen into that, the more free the mind will be, and the less impeded the loving kindness will be. And so when people will say hurtful things to us, for example, we know that they're saying that from a place of hurt. They are the ones who are hurting, and then they're saying that to us because they're not well. They're just not well. And it's not yours to take on. And so you just can still give them loving kindness or compassion, because it doesn't matter. It's selfless. You're not in the game. You don't have, one of my friends says, you don't have a dog in the game, or whatever the expression is. And so it becomes very much like that. The more we detach, the more we let go, the more selfless the love becomes, and the more radiant, the more pure it becomes also. There's a sutta reference here if you want to read it. I'm going to skip over it. And then loving kindness is very tangible when we practice meditation, especially about mental states and emotional states. Sometimes it can be a little bit nebulous or vague, or we don't really know. Sometimes cultivating bhāvanā with mental states can be something that we're not used to, and that's why we're doing it, because learning about emotions, we're not taught that at school, and so we need some training and what to do with that. And loving kindness is a very clear and tangible, we could call it an object. I prefer a subject, a theme, a vehicle of our awareness. And so it's quite relatable, it's quite tangible. And so we can more easily work with that. And so it's quite helpful in that regard. For example, equanimity or calm, if we were to start with that, then it's great, but the mind will not be settled enough to really be able to experience it deeper. And so and it's not tangible that much. The mind can go, and, when you're just radiating calm, it's great. But if there's a lot of agitation in the mind, then it's limited. So loving kindness is much more tangible and will help us start. Boundlessness and detachment, that is another really interesting combination. The way that the Buddha taught loving kindness needed to be completely open, really, in all direction. And to do that, we need to let go. We need to detach. And so some people, we get a whole bunch of comments sometimes, yeah, but the Buddha didn't teach the 6 R's. Well, the 6 R's is just, if you don't like it, you don't have to use it. But it's just principles. It's a bundle of principles, and the principles are actually found here. And if you see here in the suttas, the Buddha said, one develops the awakening factor or support of awareness filled with love. And so each of the 7 factors of awakening, you can develop them with loving kindness. And they have to be supported by letting go, supported by calming down, supported by cessation or release, culminating in surrender or relaxation. In Pali, this is Viveka nisittang, viraga nisittang, nirodha nisittang, vossaga parinaming. And for the Pali nerds here, this is basically talking about letting go, relaxing. And this is where we find the 6 R's. If you don't like the word 6 R's, don't use it, but it's there, it's here. And it's in many places. We're not making that up. And the thing is, you will need to learn to let go and relax, because hindrances come with tension in your body and in your mind, and they take up the room. They make your mind limited, and therefore the loving kindness is not able to take full bloom. And so this is the way to truly practice here, and I'll come back to that later. Okay. Requirements and guidance, I put that there because nowadays loving kindness is taught in a specific way where we repeat things over and over again. May all beings be happy in the forward direction. May they all be protected. May they all be safe, free from harm. May nothing bad come to them. And there's a whole page. And then you do the next direction, and then the next direction, and then the in-between directions. And so it's like 10 directions, and it's a lot of words. But the thing is, you might not actually feel loving kindness when you do that. So the most important thing is to feel it. And the problem is that that's why nowadays it's considered just a lower practice, is because it's not practiced properly. We don't put emphasis on the feeling and how genuine it must be. That requires a lot of work and probably some guidance, because there's lots of stages through that. For example, one will start and will have subjects or imagination or thinking and reflection, a spiritual friend to uplift the mind, to feel the love. And then that needs to get going. And so really, in the end, of course, coming to a retreat and giving yourself that momentum will really help to pick up that ability, and to have the right guidance at the same time to say, you're doing right. Just, don't go there. That's not useful. That's where we're trying to go. And this is actually, if you do this, you'll end up there. Or if you do that, you'll end up there. Just keep going in this way. And then as you pick it up, you'll see it. But at first, it might take some time. And to build it within ourselves, there's a bit of a list of things that we need to go through for it to really reach its right maturity. And so the guidance is really helpful. And loving kindness goes through different stages, and it becomes very steady and stable at some point if it's done properly. But to get there, we can't jump there. There's a way, there's a process, and we need to know how to let go, how to practice right effort, how unwholesome states manifest in the mind and the body, and to learn to release that. And then I'll be speaking a bit more on that later. Now, one of the suttas, the teachings that I like the most, that is really a cornerstone for starting meditation, is the analogy of the cloth. And if you read that sutta, you have a very good, I read it on retreats very often. It's not the only one that I use, but it's one of them. You'll start with a really good understanding of how discerning the two kinds of states is important, making the difference and seeing all of the unwholesome states and letting them go and feeling the joy after that arising, and then the sequence of gladness to collectedness, natural samadhi. From letting go of those hindrances, of those unwholesome states, gladness arise. From that gladness, joy. From joy, tranquility, the body becomes calm. When the body becomes calm, the mind experiences happiness, and then the happy mind becomes collected. And so that's the sequence. When the hindrances go, then the mind becomes really uplifted, becomes collected. And then the Buddha explains, after that, when you experience that for yourself, you'll have unwavering confidence in the teaching, the Dhamma. And then because you understand the Dhamma, you'll have faith, you'll have confidence that what the Buddha was teaching was right. Therefore, you have confidence in the Buddha and the Sangha because they're practicing that. So that's where the right faith, or the right placing your faith or confidence, it comes from your own experience. So it's not about blind faith. It's about, you see the teaching works. When you abandon anger, you're happy. So it's that simple. There's a path to practicing it, but anyways. And so he says after that, the next step is you practice the 4 Brahmavihāras, loving kindness, compassion, boundlessly, boundless love, boundless compassion, boundless joy, and then boundless calm or equanimity. And then he says, and then one understands there is the base, the unwholesome states, there is the sublime, the wholesome states, the Brahmavihāras, and there is a release beyond this whole field of conceptual thinking. Okay, now we are getting into deeper material. And see, this sutta is actually quite useful, and it's probably one of the best meditation instructions out in the canon. It's at the beginning of the Majjhima Nikāya and the middle length discourses, and that's where a lot of really good essential suttas to begin the practice are, if you're interested in learning about what the Buddha taught, how he taught meditation. And then in other teachings, if we go to the Sankhitta Sutta, which is the concise instruction where we have a clear template where the Brahmavihāras, like boundless love, can move through the jhanas, the levels of meditation. And I really like how the Buddha he doesn't talk about objects of meditation. He simply says to make boundless love, make it a vehicle, make it a foundation, practice it, accumulate it, and undertake it thoroughly. So he's not saying it's an object of meditation. He's saying that it's a more dynamic process, and it's because we're training ourselves to experience that more and more, mental development and tapping into neuroplasticity and of our brain and nervous system, to experience that more and more, and we can actually change towards that. And then he says here, and to develop it, you should develop it, if you really want to become better at it, you should develop it with thinking and imagination, without thinking but with imagination, without thinking nor imagination. So with something to uplift your mind, and then without something, just free like that. That would be the spiritual friend or whatever, the puppy or the kitten, the goat. With joy and beyond joy, or without stronger joy. So that's the stronger joy. Joy will be there, or it will turn into bliss, but it will calm down. And with constant delight or ease, and with constant calm. So these are the 4 first jhanas. These are the factors of them. It's a short explanation, and then he talks about the 4 Brahmavihāras. You develop them like that through the jhanas, and then he talks about the 4 Satipatthanas, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. You do the same thing, and so those 2 always came together very often. Loving kindness is definitely a valid and strong and well-established practice, and it goes quite a lot further than a lot of people think. And as I mentioned earlier, there's an more advanced practice where we actually learn to develop loving kindness with each of the factors of awakening. And each of these factors are supported, like I said earlier, by letting go, by calming down or relaxing, by releasing, bringing things, unwholesome states to an end, and then that culminates in surrender or relaxation, Vossaga. Parinami, which actually the word Vossaga, if you look in the dictionary, it can be translated as relaxation, literally. So I'm not even making that up, which is another really interesting thing if you like these kinds of findings. There is a way that we can develop loving kindness accompanied with mindfulness, accompanied with dhamma vichaya, discerning mental states, loving kindness with continuous devotion, energy, virya, loving kindness with joy, and then loving kindness with tranquility, collectedness, and then mental steadiness. And these are the 7 factors of awakening. In this practice, that is pretty much the template, anyways, in the way that I share it with others is really we go through these stages. I'm not really putting a lot of emphasis on it, but that is the structure that we're following. And so that is exactly what you're getting on retreat. Everybody has been here. And then there is a more, there's a step further where we can go. There's a sutta where the Buddha explains how to bring loving kindness to a further maturation, where it reaches its full potential or its full maturity. And he says that the loving kindness itself stops at the beautiful, and the beautiful is the fourth jhana. In terms of depth of meditation. And he says that we can develop, on top of the 7 factors of enlightenment or of awakening, while we cultivate loving kindness, then we should also train to make our mind unshaken to whatever is pleasant outside, and we feel compelled to see it as maybe see disadvantage in them, to see unpleasant things that come to us as, well, maybe we can see that there's some advantage in it. And so whenever these things come and go, our mind remain unshaken, and we have better mental stability. And so that is a little bit step further into a deeper teaching on loving kindness. This is the Mettā Sahagata Sutta. This is Samyutta Nikāya 4654. And so that is actually quite a beautiful teaching that is bringing loving kindness practice much deeper. If you'd like to read a teaching that is not just about radiating to the directions, that sutta will explain quite a lot about where the Brahmavihāras, each of them, where their limit is in terms of jhana, and how to practice them completely with the 7 factors of awakening and with practicing with equanimity. And for those who might still be skeptical that loving kindness is not an advanced practice, well, there are mentions of much further practices where loving kindness is mentioned in relation also to discernment, deeper aspects of wisdom of the Buddha's teaching. And it is clearly stated that when it is understood properly and when we practice it properly with the right understanding, it can lead literally to final knowledge, which is full awakening, and also non-return, so anagami. So these are not, these are very profound realizations. And so one of those teachings is the Majjhima Nikāya 52, the Atthakkanagara Sutta, where the Ananda is teaching someone how to, if there's this one thing that we could do to break through to awakening, and he says the same thing for the 4 first jhanas, and then he says the same thing for the 4 Brahmavihāras, and then the 3 last arupa jhanas. So here, one abides pervading 1/4 with a mind imbued with loving kindness. Likewise the 2nd, likewise the 3rd, likewise the 4th. So above, below, around, and everywhere, and to all, as to himself, he abides pervading that all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. One considers this and understands it thus: this deliverance of mind through loving kindness is conditioned, volitionally produced. But whatever is conditioned and volitionally produced is impermanent and subject to cessation, subject to an end. It is impermanent. If one is steady in that, one attains the destruction of the taints. This is not my translation, this is Bhikkhu Bodhi's. But if one does not attain the destruction of the taints, one goes to a Brahmaloka, a world of Brahma for non-return, and they will not, they are only bound for awakening from there. So that is attaining the state of non-return. And see here, when it is coupled with wisdom, the deeper wisdom on of the Buddha, on the impermanent nature of reality, of conditioned, fabricated states, of the fabricated reality, and even the mind. We can even use loving kindness as a basis to develop this, and actually all of the jhanas and all of the Brahmavihāras for that matter. And on this journey, we begin with loving kindness, but I just want to make clear that we do practice all of the Brahmavihāras, and we hopefully get to become skilled at all of them. This might take a few retreats and a few years, but it's still very much what we are practicing. Now, the third chapter is kind of meant as an overview, and it's not meant, there's not as much material in this one. Well, there could be, but I'll just go briefly over my research in the past few weeks. I saw that, in fact, the Buddha, in the past stories of his past lives, there was a lot of his past lives that were spent developing to a great extent the Brahmavihāras, so that he could have the good qualities and the merits in this lifetime where he came to actually break through to awakening. And I think to think that we can skip that and to go right to something else that is overlooking that practice completely, I think we are kidding ourselves. I think we have to be very good at those practices before we go even deeper. And I thought it was really interesting to see all of these past lives of the Buddha where he actually developed this many times, and that brought him quite a lot of good, of vipaka, like we say in Buddhism. Kamma is like what we do, the karma, the action, and kamma vipaka is the result of action. So when we get the return of our actions, whether good or bad. Nowadays, karma has a bad reputation, but literally, karma is neutral. It can be good or bad. So if we do good things come back to us also. And the Buddha knew this. And one thing that is really great, I wanted to just place that there, because I've received some comments sometimes about skeleton meditation and foulness meditation, foulness of the body and all that. Yeah, those are valid meditations that the Buddha taught, but I just want to mention that nowhere in his past lives did he practice that. And was that considered an actual very highly developed, that would really develop the mind? I think these meditations, when they are prescribed, it's more to protect from very intense or coarse unwholesome states, like really like strong physical attraction or things like that. It's helpful to soothe the mind or like detach the mind from that. It will protect the mind, but I just want to say that these meditations will not develop your mind in a way that is uplifted. And in fact, there's references in the suttas where these meditations did not always go well for people. And it didn't end up in a good story, and not a happy ending. And it also it will protect the mind, but it will not develop it. That's the end story, I think. And it will develop it in a way, but not bring it further. And so we have to be careful with these meditations. And sometimes we get a lot of comments about, loving kindness, but this is all like fluffy stuff and feel good meditation. Why don't you talk about foulness and all of this and the cemetery meditations? Well, they are real and they are monastic practices mostly. And honestly, I wouldn't recommend those too much, because to pay attention to really intense recollections like that, actually, in the suttas, like when the Buddha explains how aversion comes up, he says when we look at something that is unpleasant for too long. And so we also want to be careful, because these recollections that are a bit less uplifted, let's say, they can also bring your mind towards anger or disgust or things like that, and that's not really going to be helpful. And so I just want to delineate that. And I just thought it was really interesting that the Buddha never talks about that in his past lives. That's what he practiced. He practiced the Brahmavihāras because they were really the abodes of Brahma. Brahma was known, and it seems, for eons and eons and expansions and collapses of the universe, that Brahma was known to abide in 4 states: love, compassion, joy, and calm. And so, and it seems, it's in the Bible, love is God, God is love. It's everywhere. It's in Hinduism. This seems to be a very universal understanding, spiritual understanding that is across religions. And so what the Buddha was mainly pointing at, though, was that he was saying, and even though I practice loving kindness for that long and it brought me so much, he never was able to realize Nibbāna. And we're not going to go there tonight, but I just want to say that. And that is true. That is true that the Brahmavihāras always he was attaining very lofty realizations or states, and then he would come back down after eons and eons and eons. He would come back down to the human realm, and then he would do that again. And so it is true that it doesn't directly lead to Nibbāna, but if we have the understanding of the Buddha of anicca, dukkha, anatta, the impermanent nature of reality, and the impersonal nature of states, and the conditioned nature of even mind and consciousness, then with that understanding on top, we can actually bring loving kindness, even loving kindness, to very profound stages of realizations. There's all the material here, and I invite you all to have a peek whenever you want. And in the end, the Buddha is praising loving kindness, and he's comparing it as just like the moon compared to the stars. The moon's radiance is always far surpassing the radiance of any of the stars. And he says it's the same thing for loving kindness. For any vehicle that is going to generate karma, anything that you will do in life that will generate actions or the return of action, the result of action, none of them is more beneficial than loving kindness. Just like the moon is so much brighter than any of the stars in the sky at night, just in the same way, loving kindness surpasses, outshines all of these other ways that we could do good deeds. Than to practice loving kindness, to have a boundless mind, which is selfless, which is detached, which has letting go built into it, and that is completely open. And on this, the last heading is experiential knowledge. And so even though we went through 40-something pages of references and sutta analysis and all of that, I just want to say that this is nothing. And the real way to experience all of this is to come on retreat and to really get to the meditation, to really give it a try. Because this is all theory right now, and theory is really beautiful, but it needs to be applied and it needs to be practiced. And so the only real way that you will know this for yourself, and that's what the Buddha recommended for you to know this for yourself, is through your own direct experience. And so start doing loving kindness meditation. Thank you all for coming. Great. Well, thank you all. I think I didn't spill that much. Great. I can't see you very well, but the Hollywood studio here. The garage light. Perfect. I'm gonna do my oil change after. It's perfect. Yeah, you could just start with joy too. The thing is, that's maybe something I didn't add on there, but loving kindness, it can be difficult sometimes because it really pulls on the strings in our heart that we'll have to look into some things in our heart for these strings to play right, and we'll have to do some tuning. And loving kindness is special because sometimes it will bring us to these places. Our sense of happiness is often tied to our ability to love. And if we were hurt in a relationship before, if there's something on our heart, because we practice loving kindness, it will kind of bring it up and we'll have to deal with it. And now we're going to more like forgiveness and things like that. But loving kindness is usually where we start because it's also a very powerful, it's a powerful practice in that sense. So it will really cleanse our heart. But we could start with joy. I just think that, or compassion. To start with loving kindness, by experience, I can say that that's what works the best usually for people. And it's the clearest one, I would say. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. Dhanyavad. Bohomaping. Kap kun ka. Take care. Teruan saranay.